Imagine suffering for 5 endless days at an altitude of 7,400 meters, a place where the air is so thin that drawing a single breath feels like a violent struggle for survival. High upon the merciless slopes of Annapurna, a drama was unfolding that would become known as the most desperate and intense rescue operation the Himalayas had ever witnessed. While Iñaki Ochoa de Olza was slowly fading away, trapped within a freezing prison of ice and snow, a call to action went out. The legendary Ueli Steck, along with the absolute elite of the global climbing community, dropped everything they were doing to attempt to defeat many considered suicidal, a frantic charge back into the lethal embrace of the death zone. However, what we are looking at today is far more than a simple chronicle of a tragedy or a disaster report. It is a profound exploration of unimaginable grit, the deep bonds of brotherhood that form in the face of death, and the terrible price required for total freedom. We have to ask ourselves, was the adrenaline and the glory truly worth the cost of a human life? Try to visualize this scene: a lone man standing atop the roof of the world, gazing out. But he isn't looking down with arrogance at the lands he has conquered. He is looking inward. Instead of the roaring triumph of a victor, he feels a sense of quiet irony, detaching himself from the chaotic hustle and bustle of the civilization far below him. Iñaki Ochoa de Olza exploded onto the international stage of high-altitude mountaineering, but he didn't look like your typical athlete hungry for gold medals and accolades. He appeared more like a warrior philosopher, a man who was fully prepared to enter into a philosophical argument with the laws of gravity themselves. The origin of this unique spirit can be traced back to Pamplona, a city defined by its ancient fortified walls and an unyielding sense of identity. It was here, wandering through the narrow cobblestone labyrinths, that a young Iñaki absorbed the essence of what the locals refer to as the Basque Code. This code is a potent cocktail of stubborn resilience, fierce pride, and a non-negotiable demand for absolute inner freedom. His family nurtured this, creating a rare environment where, instead of suffering under rigid control and expectations, he was granted trust and the liberty to make and learn from his own painful mistakes. This foundational freedom allowed him to mature into the kind of man who had zero interest in the applause of a crowd. To him, the mountains were never a stadium designed for breaking records. They were a vast open-air library where every jagged rock and ancient glacier concealed the answers to existence's most complex riddles. He climbed with a singular purpose: to discover the raw truth of his own character, not to secure a fancy paper certificate, a corporate sponsorship, or a piece of metal to hang on a wall. During this era, the climbing industry was rapidly transforming into a vanity parade of massive egos, yet Iñaki staunchly refused to participate in that circus. When couriers arrived at his door bearing boxes of the newest, most expensive gear from eager sponsors, he would often just laugh at the absurdity of it all. In his eyes, these items were merely fabric and tools, functional necessities perhaps, but certainly not a source of pride or a reason to feel obligated to a corporate brand. The entire concept of star status or celebrity was completely alien to his nature. He made a conscious, deliberate choice to distance himself from the glossy commercial side of the sport, a world where logos, photo shoots, and contracts were the only things that seemed to matter. From this rejection, his famous philosophy of pura vida was born, a phrase that signifies so much more than its literal translation of pure life. It serves as a manifesto of radical honesty. It demands a life lived without masks or pretense, devoid of artificial enhancements, and free from the exhausting desire to project an image of being better or more successful than you actually are. Iñaki determined that, in the high mountains, much like in everyday life, the only thing that truly counts is a pure style. It is about facing the fury of the elements, one-on-one, armed with absolutely nothing but the capacity of your own lungs, the strength of your muscles, and the fortitude of your will. Accumulating a collection of summits means absolutely nothing if you have to sell your soul or compromise your core principles to achieve them. The true treasure lies in the struggle of the journey itself, and maintaining a crystal clear, unflinching honesty with oneself. To understand the physical toll, imagine trying to run a full marathon while breathing exclusively through a tiny cocktail straw. That is an accurate description of how the human body functions at an altitude of 8,000 meters in that terrifying layer of the atmosphere climbers refer to as the death zone. In this hostile environment, the human body ceases to recover or heal. Instead, it begins a slow, inevitable process of shutting down, literally cannibalizing its own muscle tissue and energy reserves just to keep the vital organs functioning for a few more moments. It was in the year 1993, at the foot of the gargantuan peak, Cho-Oyu, that Iñaki Ochoa de Olza prepared to step across this invisible but fatal threshold for the very first time in his life. He was about to ascend to a staggering height of 8,201 meters, and he made a radical decision that absolutely terrified many of the seasoned professionals of that era. He announced he would climb without supplemental oxygen and without a mask, relying entirely on his own biological adaptation. For the vast majority of climbers, bottled oxygen is the ticket to the big leagues, a safety net that guarantees a return trip and acts as an insurance policy against cerebral or pulmonary edema. But Iñaki viewed that rubber mask as a barrier, a wall that separates a human being from the true raw nature of the mountain. He was convinced that pumping artificial air into your lungs changes the very essence of the sport, reducing a formidable 8,000er into a standard run-of-the-mill 6,000-meter hike. This logic became his personal axiom, an unbreakable rule. If you are breathing gas from a tank, you are effectively lowering the bar and diminishing the achievement. You are cheating the mountain of its power, and worst of all, you are cheating yourself of the experience. The authentic challenge is to accept the environment on its own brutal terms, not to alter the chemistry of the air to suit your personal comfort. Iñaki placed all his bets on speed and agility. While massive, heavily loaded commercial expeditions would lay siege to the slopes for weeks, constructing literal cities of tents and fixed ropes, he opted for the tactics of a swift guerrilla-style assault. His approach was simple, minimum gear for maximum mobility. Since every single extra kilogram at that altitude drains precious energy reserves, he became ruthless, shedding any item he considered secondary or non-essential. It is an admittedly risky strategy. If a storm hits, he has almost no safety margin to fall back on and no heavy protection or supplies to wait out the violent weather. He transformed into a high-altitude sprinter, a discipline where safety depends entirely on how fast you can dash up, and more critically, how fast you can retreat. When he finally stood on the summit of Cho-Oyu, he saw more than just a panorama of the Himalayas. He saw confirmation that his philosophy was correct. His body successfully withstood the monstrous physical strain. His lungs managed to cope with the incredibly thin air, and his legs remained strong enough to carry him down with the same confidence that had carried him up. This success marked his point of no return. He now understood that he possessed the unique ability to function at levels where others would lose consciousness without life support. He had found his true path. This wasn't just mountaineering anymore. It was an honest duel, a contest where the only judges were his own physiology and the crushing weight of the altitude. He asked the question, what is your conscience worth? For most people, the price is calculated in dollars or social status. But for Iñaki Ochoa de Olza, the price of integrity was measured in the meters of a snowy ridge that he refused to cross if the conditions weren't right. In 1995, he arrived at the base of Shishapangma, the lowest of the 14 8,000ers a peak that many professionals foolishly dismiss as easy. Iñaki felt a colossal surge of strength and determination, choosing his signature speed style to practically fly up the north face. His pace was nothing short of stunning. He went from the base camp to the highest point of the climb in less than 24 hours. It was an incredible athletic result, a showcase of his physical superiority and perfect acclimatization. The group reached the high point, snapped their photos, exchanged hugs, and began the descent, believing that in the record books this day would be marked as a total success. Iñaki stood at 8,008 meters with the world sprawled at his feet. However, Shishapangma is a deceptive and tricky mountain, possessing two distinct summits, the central summit and the main summit. These 2 points are separated by a long, razor-sharp snow ridge, and traversing it requires time, immense skill, and nerves of steel. Iñaki had stopped at the central summit. The true peak was just a short distance away, horizontally, and a negligible amount vertically, but the group decided to turn back. This is standard procedure for most expeditions. After all, you are formally in the 8,000-meter zone, so you have technically conquered the mountain. But back in base camp, Iñaki faced a moral dilemma that would have broken any career-focused climber. He held a certificate confirming his success. His sponsors were thrilled, and his official statistics were updated. But deep inside him, a gnawing feeling of fraudulence began to grow. He looked up at the main summit from below and realized with sinking dread that he had cheated himself. He had stopped where it was convenient and safe, not where the mountain actually ended. For a man of his uncompromising nature, this was tantamount to a defeat. He understood that in the stark reality of mountaineering, almost simply does not count. If you have not stood on the absolute highest point, you have not completed the route. Iñaki then made a tough decision that shocked everyone around him. He physically struck Shishapangma from his personal list of achievements. For him, this 8,000er remained unclimbed. He refused to acknowledge an ascent that 99% of climbers would have happily counted on their resumes. This moment became the ultimate test of his life's philosophy. Honesty with himself proved to be far more important than external recognition or fame. He vowed to return and do it all over again, but this time he would go to the very last centimeter to settle this debt with the mountain and his own conscience. A marathon on a vertical wall where every breath is a war and the air is thin to the point of non-existence, this is what mountaineering looks like through the eyes of the Basque. Between the years 1996 and 1999, Iñaki Ochoa de Olza takes a scenario that would be a living nightmare for most and transforms it into his standard operating procedure, completely rewriting the playbook for high-altitude survival. He casts aside every lingering doubt and shifts gears, accelerating with an intensity that is frankly terrifying to witness. The Karakoram Range, that unforgiving, jagged labyrinth of stone located in Pakistan, becomes his personal arena for testing human limits. It is the summer of 1996 when he finds himself standing at the foot of Gasherbrum 1, a formidable giant also whispered about as the Hidden Peak. For this specific assault on the summit, Iñaki selects the notorious Japanese couloir, a suffocatingly narrow vertical throat of the mountain packed with ice and snow where a single misstep guarantees a fatal plunge into the void below. He navigates the route with surgical precision and supreme confidence, refusing the aid of bottled oxygen. But what unfolds immediately after is even more mind-bending. While a typical climber would require months of recovery to bounce back from an 8,000-meter peak, Iñaki's physiology seems to operate on an alien frequency. A mere 19 days later, he is already standing triumphant on the summit of the neighboring Titan Gasherbrum 2. He conquers two 8,000ers in a single season, completely free of artificial performance enhancers, linking them together, almost as if taking one long, continuous breath. To dismiss this as simple luck would be an insult. It is a masterclass in phenomenal biological endurance. By the time 1999 rolls around, Iñaki decides he hasn't pushed hard enough yet, and he prepares to raise the stakes to a lethal new level. His crosshairs are locked on Lhotse, the fourth highest mountain on Earth, and the towering neighbor to Everest, rising to a staggering 8,516 meters. It is here that he unveils a climbing style that cements his reputation as an elite sprinter in a world of slow-moving hikers. He launches his attack on the mountain in pure solo mode. There are no rope partners to catch him, no Sherpas to carry the load, just one man engaging in a raw private conversation with the mountain. While traditional commercial expeditions waste days establishing intermediate camps and slowly inching their way up like a caravan, Iñaki moves with a singular, relentless rhythm. He departs from base camp and tags the summit in a blistering 22 and a half hours. Let the reality of those figures sink in for a moment. What demands 4 days of agonizing, lung-burning labor, from others he accomplishes in less than 24 hours. He literally flies past the tents, where other climbers lie sleeping, waiting for a weather window as he pushes upward toward the stars. This velocity fundamentally alters the mathematics of safety in the mountains. Iñaki transforms risk from an abstract fear into a precise, calculated instrument that he wields with expert hands. The logic is ruthless but sound. The less time you spend exposed in the death zone, the lower the statistical probability that the mountain will murder you with a cerebral edema, a sudden avalanche, or a freezing storm. He stops playing Russian roulette with the elements. Instead, he is simply outrunning them. Within the tight-knit climbing community, whispers begin to circulate, speaking of his name with a complex mixture of deep respect and terrified awe. Iñaki offers living proof that the human vessel can function at incomprehensible levels, provided the mind has been purged of fear and the will is forged harder than granite. However, when he has to wear an oxygen mask, it seals to his face with a hiss, a sound that to Iñaki echoes like the slamming of a prison cell door. Fast forward to 2001, and he finds himself back on the slopes of Mount Everest, but this time not as a free spirit chasing glory, but as a hired guardian. He takes a job as a high-altitude guide, and the fine print of his contract is brutal. Wealthy clients are paying a king's ransom for guaranteed safety, which demands that the guide remains sharp, physically dominant, and ready to make life or death decisions in a split second. To ensure he can perform at that level, Iñaki is forced to plug himself into a bottle of supplemental oxygen. For a man with his purest ethics, this is an agonizing spiritual compromise. He feels like a soaring eagle that has had its wings clipped, forced to trudge along the ground. By the early 2000s, Everest is rapidly devolving into a crowded, chaotic stadium. Iñaki watches with a heavy heart and growing horror as the wilderness he worships is commodified and transformed. He finds himself boxed in by hundreds of people, all draped in plastic tubes, masks, and regulators. They move with agonizing slowness, tethered to the tanks on their backs like critical patients wandering out of an intensive care unit. Iñaki, never one to bite his tongue, coins a devastating label for them. He brands them astronauts and scuba divers. In his eyes, these tourists aren't visiting the mountain. They are importing a sea-level atmosphere, hermetically sealing themselves off from the harsh reality of the altitude with barriers of plastic and rubber. They might see the spectacular vistas, but they don't feel the altitude in their marrow. They rob themselves of that blood-chilling, honest dialogue with their own physiology that constitutes the very soul of true alpinism. Yet even within this commercialized purgatory, Iñaki extracts value. His time working as a guide becomes a brutal finishing school for survival, allowing him to rack up invaluable experience across more than 200 distinct expeditions. When you carry the burden of responsibility for another human life, one far less experienced than your own, your senses act like a radar sharpening to a razor's edge. You learn to forecast a coming blizzard just by the shifting hue of the clouds, to identify the onset of cerebral edema in a client's single clumsy hand gesture, and to sense the stability of the snowpack through your spinal cord. This colossal volume of time spent in the thin air transforms him into a grandmaster, capable of calculating risk on a purely instinctive primal level. Iñaki draws a distinct line in the snow. There is the job, the hard labor of dragging clients upward to earn the cash he desperately needs. And then there is his personal, pure sport. The moment his contractual obligations to the clients are fulfilled, he sheds the role of the babysitter and rips off the hated oxygen mask. The money he extracts from the astronauts becomes the high-octane fuel for his true passion. He descends from the circus of Everest with a steely resolve to wash the commercial experience off his soul. He returns to his own code, a world where the air is thin, clear, and honest, and the only engine driving him upward is his own heart. For most, an expedition into the death zone is a grim, slow-motion military siege where every vertical meter is purchased with immense suffering. But in the year 2004, Iñaki Ochoa de Olza flips the script, turning high-altitude mountaineering into something resembling a Formula One race. He begins shattering every preconceived notion of human physiology. This year evolves into his golden season, a magical window of time where his physical body and his fighting spirit align to reach their absolute apex. He kicks things off with Makalu, the ominous black giant, standing at 8,481 meters. While other teams spend days debating strategy and setting up for a summit push, Iñaki executes a daring, lightning-fast dash. He flies to the summit in a mind-boggling 9 hours and 40 minutes. The time seems ripped from a fantasy novel. At this altitude, humans usually move at a snail's pace, requiring 5 desperate gasps of air for every single step they take. But Makalu turns out to be nothing more than a warm-up session for the main event. Iñaki travels to Pakistan, standing at the foot of K2, the Savage Mountain, the second highest point on Earth, and arguably the deadliest peak in existence. He selects the classic Abruzzi Spur route. At an altitude of 7,950 meters, where the oxygen is so scarce the human brain begins to shut down, Iñaki punches the button on his internal stopwatch. He must navigate the infamous bottleneck beneath a looming serac of ice the size of an apartment building that could collapse at any moment. Most climbers require 12, sometimes 15 hours to traverse this nightmare, balancing on a knife edge between life and death. Iñaki obliterates the section in 6 hours and 35 minutes. He practically sprints past exhausted climbers who can only stare at his retreating figure as if he were a high-altitude hallucination. Witnesses frozen on the slopes and photographs taken at the summit confirm this phenomenal achievement. He stands at 8,611 meters, yet his pulse is barely higher than that of a marathon runner on a casual training jog. This specific ascent carves his name into the history books because speed like that on K2 is the only effective life insurance policy available. The faster you move, the less time the mountain has to kill you. But Iñaki refuses to stop there. That very autumn, he returns to Cho Oyu to place a final bold exclamation point on his incredible season, setting off straight from base camp. and skipping every intermediate sleeping camp along the way. The mountain where he first tasted the bitterness of high altitude 11 years prior now surrenders to him completely in just 11 hours and 16 minutes. 3 8,000ers conquered in a single calendar year, all three climbed without supplemental oxygen and in an extremely aggressive fast style. At that moment, Iñaki Ochoa de Olza ceases to be just a talented climber from the Basque Country. He solidifies his status as one of the strongest high-altitude mountaineers walking the planet, a man for whom the laws of gravity seem to operate by an entirely different set of rules. However, the memory of one specific expedition remained lodged in his mind like a sharp, tiny pebble in his boot, nagging him relentlessly for 11 years. It doesn't stop you from walking, but you feel the irritation with every single step. This is the feeling Iñaki Ochoa de Olza has carried since that expedition back in 1995 when, young and impulsive, he was forced to stop just a few agonizing meters short of his true goal. In 2006, he returns to the base of Shishapangma no longer a brash youngster, but a renowned master ready to finally remove that pebble and settle an old score once and for all. To the rest of the mountaineering community, the record books already show he conquered this peak, but Iñaki isn't interested in public perception. He knows what really happened up there. This isn't just another climb for him, it is a personal crusade to reclaim his honor and settle an internal debt that has been gnawing at him ever since he compromised his standards in his younger years. He has absolutely no interest in following the herd or taking the path of least resistance. Retracing someone else's footsteps offers him zero excitement and feels practically robotic. Instead, Iñaki sets his sights on the northeast face, a nightmare of verticality and complex topography that requires nothing less than absolute technical perfection to navigate. In typical fashion, he decides to stack the deck against himself to make the victory count. He isn't just going solo, he is carving out a brand new route where no human has ever set foot. The risk factor is off the charts, but that is exactly where he thrives. When you blaze a new trail, you don't have the luxury of following boot prints clipping into old fixed ropes or radioing for help if you take a wrong turn. His solitary war against gravity begins at the high assault camp sitting at an altitude of 6,400 meters. From that second forward, his entire universe contracts until it consists only of the narrow beam of light from his headlamp and the rhythmic crunch of steel crampons biting into bulletproof ice. This ascent transforms into a masterclass showcasing the peak of his technical evolution. Back in the 90s, he would have tried to bully the mountain into submission with raw power and youthful aggression, but today he operates with the precision of a neurosurgeon. He dissects the mountain's formidable defenses, spotting invisible lines of weakness in the rock where other climbers would only see a fatal dead end. He christens this new variation L'Orpen Diario de Navarra, a nod to his roots. Iñaki moves with his trademark velocity, stripping away all unnecessary gear to travel fast and light, but this time, that speed is tempered by a colossal reservoir of survival wisdom accumulated over decades in the death zone. Suddenly, he arrives at the moment of reckoning, standing once again on the pre-summit ridge that has haunted his dreams. 11 years ago, he threw in the towel right here at the central summit. Today, he stares down that same terrifying razor-sharp knife edge of snow that guards the path to the true main summit. The gale-force wind screams around him, trying to pluck him from the ridge and toss him into the void, but Iñaki digs in and forces himself to take those final critical steps. He successfully navigates the traverse and finally plants his boots at an elevation of 8,027 meters. There is no ambiguity this time, no asterisks next to his name. The ledger is balanced. He gazes out at the curvature of the earth, filled with a profound sense of redemption and soul-deep satisfaction that no corporate sponsorship or lottery win could ever purchase. This victory marks a massive turning point in his quest to bag all 14 of the world's 8,000ers. The list of unfinished business is getting shorter by the day, and the finale of this epic saga is finally coming into focus. Iñaki begins his descent, his spirit lighter than it has been in years. He has proven the most important thing a man can prove, that he has the humility to admit his failures and the grit to return and rectify them. Shishapangma, satisfied with his penance, finally opens its grip and allows him to leave in peace. The grim reality is that 1 out of every 3 souls who dare to challenge this beast never comes home. These are the terrifying odds of Annapurna, the 10th highest peak on the planet and arguably the most murderous and unforgiving of all the 8,000ers. It is May of 2008 when Iñaki Ochoa de Olza arrives at base camp with eyes wide open to the danger. He knows exactly who he is getting into the ring with, and he knows the house always has the advantage. His trophy cabinet already holds 12 of the 14 giants. To finish his life's work and claim the crown of the Himalayas, he only needs to tick off Kanchenjunga and this volatile, unpredictable mountain known as the goddess of the harvests. However, Annapurna has zero tolerance for arrogance or climbers who treat it like a math problem to be solved. It demands total submission. Iñaki opts for the punishing marathon route along the East Ridge, turning this into something far more than a simple athletic endeavor. It becomes a high-wire act without a net, balancing on a jagged spine of ice that stretches for kilometers with sheer bottomless drops waiting on both the left and the right. His partner in this high-stakes gamble is the Romanian alpinist Horia Colebașanu. These two are cut from the same cloth, practically brothers in spirit. They share a hatred for ego-driven climbing, a refusal to use bottled oxygen, and a belief that the only way to climb is in a fair, unadulterated fight with the elements. They operate like a single organism, communicating through instinct and body language rather than shouting over the wind. At the exact same time, as if some cosmic writer were scripting a tragedy, a parallel storyline is developing over on the south face. The legendary Swiss duo Ueli Steck and Simon Anthematten are hard at work on the other side. They are attempting to force a route of unimaginable difficulty, climbing in pure alpine style with minimal gear and maximum exposure. Two of the absolute best teams on the planet are sharing the same mountain, separated by kilometers of hostile rock and ice, totally oblivious to the fact that their destinies are about to collide in a heartbreaking way. For the moment, they are just neighbors in the world's deadliest freezer, each team locked in their own private war for survival. The mountain, like a cruel tyrant, dictates every move they are allowed to make. Then the weather slams the door shut, turning the expedition into a psychological torture chamber of endless waiting. Blizzards bury their shelters, gale force winds threaten to shred the nylon tents, and visibility drops to absolute zero. Iñaki is physically peaking his muscles, twitching with adrenaline and readiness, but he is forced to rot in a tent. For a man of action, this forced paralysis is the ultimate test, keeping his demons at bay while the clock ticks down. The expedition drags on, painfully morphing from a sprint into a grueling medieval siege. Even though he is agonizingly close to completing his 14-peak project, Iñaki manages to keep his emotions in check and his head in the game. He recites the golden rule that has kept him breathing all these years. Getting to the top is optional. Getting down is mandatory. He understands that the mountain will stand for eternity, but he only has one heartbeat to lose. The tension in base camp and high on the slopes is palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The air feels electrically charged as everyone scans the sky, praying for even the smallest break in the clouds. They are painfully aware that Annapurna only grants passage to those with the patience of a saint, but even the most patient climbers can fall victim to the hidden traps she lays in the silence. At this extreme altitude, your own biology can turn traitor without warning, shutting down vital organs one by one while you are trying to balance on a dinner plate-sized ledge. The morning of May 19th dawns, marking the start of the final round. Iñaki and Horia unzip the final tent and step out into the void, pushing for the summit. The altimeter shows 7,850 meters. The dream is right there, tantalizingly close, just a few hours of suffering away. But here in the death zone, where the air is razor thin, Iñaki's body betrays him. The cold isn't just chilling him, it's slicing through his down suit like a blade, and his hands have gone completely dead. This is far worse than standard numbness. It is the onset of catastrophic frostbite. This is the moment where veteran experience saves lives. Instead of succumbing to summit fever and trading his fingers for a moment of glory, he makes a cold, calculated decision. They are aborting the climb. You would assume the danger has passed now that they are retreating. They are moving down, heading back toward life and warmth. But that is exactly when the mountain plunges the dagger into his back. Iñaki's condition doesn't just slide, it falls off a cliff. His legs, which were driving him upward with power just an hour ago, turn into useless pillars of lead. The situation spirals into a waking nightmare instantly. His coordination evaporates, leaving him stumbling like a drunkard. Iñaki begins tripping over invisible obstacles on flat terrain, and his speech devolves into a terrifying slurred mess. These are the textbook red alert symptoms of high-altitude cerebral edema, HACE. His brain is literally swelling and crushing itself inside his skull. Simultaneously, a second killer strikes. His lungs are rapidly filling with fluid. Every single breath becomes a rattling, gurgling struggle, as if he is trying to inhale while drowning at the bottom of the ocean. Iñaki's grip on reality shatters his mind, drifting into hallucinations, while his body is racked with violent seizures. For Horia Kolibashanu, the descent transforms from a climb into a Herculean rescue mission. At an altitude where simply tying your shoelaces leaves you gasping, Horia is effectively carrying his dying partner. They are fighting for every single meter, clawing their way down the vertical face inch by agonizing inch. Gravity, which should be helping them descend, has turned into an enemy, constantly trying to drag Iñaki's limp, unresponsive body off the mountain and into the dark abyss below. Horia displays superhuman resilience, physically wrestling his friend back from the edge, forcing him to move when Iñaki just wants to lie down in the snow and sleep forever. Through sheer force of will, they drag themselves into Camp 4 at 7,400 meters. They collapse inside the nylon walls, a tiny island of safety in a raging ocean of ice, but the relief is brutally short. Iñaki is paralyzed. His body is so completely shattered that he cannot even lift his head without assistance. A violent, tearing cough rips through his chest and he keeps fading in and out of consciousness. Horia looks at his friend and accepts the horrifying reality they are boxed in. Trying to descend any further without a support team is a physical impossibility, but staying at this killing altitude is a guaranteed execution. The tent at 7,400 meters has become their final fortress. The static crackle of the radio breaks the deadly silence, a sound more chilling than the wind. Perched at 7,400 meters in a fragile shelter that the storm is trying to tear apart, Horia Kolibashanu keys the mic and sends out the call. Through the crackle of radio static and the heavy rasp of oxygen deprivation, a transmission cuts through the airwaves, delivering a death sentence that freezes everyone at base camp. Iñaki's voice breaks as he admits the terrifying truth: his legs, once capable of conquering the world's highest peaks, have completely shut down. He is paralyzed. The situation has spiraled into a full-blown nightmare. This is a man defined by his independence, a climber who carved a life out of strength and autonomy, now reduced to total helplessness. He is stranded in the death zone, entirely reliant on a world that sits kilometers of vertical distance beneath his frozen boots. Down on the glacier, within the relative safety of the tent city, the radio message hits with the force of a physical blow. Expedition managers stare at their wrists, watching the seconds tick by, realizing that the standard measurement of time has shifted. They are no longer counting days. They are watching the window of survival shrink into mere hours. Like a shockwave, the distress call blasts out of the mountain amphitheater almost instantly. Satellite uplinks beam the tragedy across the globe, reaching Kathmandu first before rippling through the international climbing community with terrifying speed. While people sitting in climate-controlled offices and warm living rooms hold their breath in anticipation, their sympathy offers no tangible solution. The only hope for a miracle lies in the hands of the few hardened souls who are physically present on the mountain right here and right now. As fate would have it, Base Camp is currently hosting Swiss alpinists Ueli Steck and Simon Anthematten. These aren't just climbers, they are the Golden Boys, the absolute elite of modern mountaineering who were preparing to launch their own record-breaking assault on the formidable South Face. At this exact moment, they are in a state of deep rest, actively recovering and conserving energy for their own summit push. They are soaking up the thick, oxygen-rich air of the lower altitude and enjoying the warmth, unaware that their plans are about to be obliterated. When the desperate plea for assistance lands at their feet, the reaction separates the true mountaineers from the tourists. Ueli and Simon don't convene a committee or weigh the pros and cons. There is no hesitation. The decision is made in a heartbeat. Their personal ambitions, the grueling months of training, the sponsorship goals, and the summit dreams, all of it is instantly swept off the table. The two Swiss climbers instinctively understand that they are not just an option. They are Iñaki's solitary lifeline. If they do not mobilize immediately, there will be nobody left to rescue by morning. It is a choice that demands a terrifying level of bravery to voluntarily strip away their safety and charge back into the very frozen hell they had just escaped. A chaotic but surgically precise packing frenzy begins. Ueli and Simon strip their gear down to the fast and light philosophy. They discard the heavy bivouac equipment, the warm sleeping bags, and the backup food supplies that usually guarantee survival. Every single gram is scrutinized. They pack only the absolute necessities for a sprint against death: a length of rope, a canister of fuel, and a medical kit loaded with dexamethasone to fight the brain swelling and stabilize the dying man. They understand that velocity is their only weapon against the mountain. Any delay or any added kilogram of burden on their backs could be the difference between life and death for the man gasping for air at 7,400 meters. The two Swiss machines storm out of camp, setting their sights on the towering wall of ice and rock. They are embarking on what will become one of the most legendary and harrowing rescue attempts in the history of the Himalayas, with every card stacked against them. They are fighting the crushing altitude, a deteriorating weather window, their own physical exhaustion, and grim statistics that suggest these missions almost always fail. Yet they climb driven, not by contractual obligations or the promise of glory, but by the unwritten sacred code of the Brotherhood of the Rope. Down below, dozens of anxious eyes track their slow progress through telescopes while high above. In a battering tent, Horia fights a lonely battle to keep the fading spark of his friend's life from extinguishing, praying that the cavalry arrives before the cold winds. It is 9 o'clock at night, a time when base camp is typically silent and asleep. But for Ueli Steck and Simon Anthematten, the ordeal is only just beginning. The darkness is their new reality. They ignite their headlamps, sending beams of light cutting through the void, illuminating nothing but swirling snow. They take the first step upward, initiating a desperate race toward a finish line, situated at an altitude where helicopters simply cannot fly. To preserve every ounce of the elite climber's energy for the technical sections above, two Sherpas step up to shoulder the load, assisting them on the trek up to Camp 1. They push through the pitch-black night, powered by pure adrenaline and the haunting knowledge that two men are trapped in an icy tomb above, waiting for a miracle. By May 20th, the rescue duo forces their way up to Camp 2 at 5,800 meters. But now, Annapurna decides to reveal her lethal nature. The weather, which was already precarious, takes a violent turn. The clouds descend and visibility vanishes, dropping to almost absolute zero. They are swallowed by a whiteout, a disorienting phenomenon where the sky and the snow merge into a seamless gray void. But the real monster is hiding beneath their boots. The slopes are groaning under the weight of fresh snowfall, skyrocketing the avalanche danger to extreme levels. They are navigating a literal minefield of ice. Every step the Swiss climbers take could trigger a catastrophe. The slightest vibration or shift in pressure has the potential to release tons of suffocating snow and sweep them into the abyss. They move forward almost blindly, navigating by gut instinct and decades of alpine experience. They know that a single miscalculation here doesn't just kill them, it seals the doom of the men waiting for salvation higher up. Meanwhile, at Camp 4, a vertical 1.5 miles above them, a quiet, heartbreaking tragedy of loyalty plays out. Iñaki is slipping away. His body is shutting down, system by system, with every labored breath draining his remaining strength. Horia Kolibashanu sits beside him. The Romanian is still physically capable of descending. He has the strength to save his own life if he leaves right now. The primal logic of survival screams for him to go. The rational choice is to abandon the dying man and run. But Horia flatly rejects the logic of self-preservation. He refuses to let his friend die alone in the cold. He chooses to remain in the freezing tent, holding Iñaki's hand, trying to transfer his own body heat to the fading climber. But the mountain has no mercy, and it offers no rewards for nobility. The extended exposure at 7,400 meters begins to destroy Horia's physiology. He starts exhibiting the terrifying early symptoms of the same high-altitude sickness that is claiming Iñaki. His cough turns wet and deep, his movements become sluggish, and his consciousness begins to fray at the edges. The rescue scenario has devolved into a stalemate. The tent is no longer a shelter for one victim and one rescuer. It now houses two potential corpses. Horia realizes his own biological clock is ticking down. If the Swiss team doesn't break through soon, the mountain will take them both. At nearly 7,000 meters, boots are not merely accessories, they are complex life support systems. To lose the function of your boots is equivalent to amputating your own feet. On May 21st, shattered from the grueling ascent, Ueli Steck and Simon Anthematten stumble into Camp 3 at 6,800 meters. They have survived the avalanche gauntlet, but they are met with a devastating realization that threatens to abort the entire mission. Ueli Steck, in his obsession with speed and efficiency, had departed base camp geared for a sprint. He had prioritized weight reduction above all else. He is wearing lightweight technical boots designed for moving fast, not for standing still in the deep freeze of the death zone. If he attempts to climb higher in this footwear, severe frostbite is a guarantee. His feet would freeze long before he could reach Iñaki's tent. The rescue operation hits a brick wall stalled by a few millimeters of insulation and plastic. But in this moment of despair, fortune intervenes in the form of a Russian expedition camped at the same elevation. Sitting in Camp 3 is Alexei Bolotov, a legend among his peers and one of the strongest high-altitude climbers of his generation. He assesses the crisis instantly. He sees a man willing to save a life, but crippled by his equipment. Bolotov does not waste time with debate or negotiation. He simply bends down and unlaces his own high-altitude boots, the very equipment his own survival depends on, and hands them over to the Swiss climber. It is an act of supreme selflessness that defies the survival instinct. To surrender your boots at this altitude is to voluntarily abandon your own summit dreams and render yourself a prisoner of the ice. Alexei understands the cost. Without those boots, he is trapped in Camp 3, unable to move up or down safely. But he decides that the life of a dying stranger is worth more than any peak. Steck pulls on Bolotov's boots. They fit perfectly. He now possesses the armor he needs to assault the final terrifying vertical stretch of Annapurna. At Camp 3, the rescue team makes a tactical split. Simon Anthematin will remain behind. Simon's new role is to act as the communications hub and, critically, to serve as the safety net for Horia Kolibashanu if and only if the Romanian manages to descend. Simon becomes the anchor, ready to catch the falling. As for Ueli Steck, he transforms into a lone wolf. He pushes upward solo, armed with borrowed gear and a level of endurance that seems inhuman. A living chain of hope is now stretched across kilometers of the mountain face. At the bottom lies the support crew. In the middle zone, Bolotov and Anthematin hold the line. And at the very pinnacle, the solitary figure of Steck is punching a path through the deep snow, fighting gravity. But time is an enemy that fights with ruthless, relentless precision. The clock is not just ticking, it is racing. Every single hour of delay drains the final drops of vitality from Iñaki, while outside the tent the wind howls new threats, promising a storm that could bury them all forever. To save a single life, a remarkable thing happened. Former rivals banded together, turning their backs on their own expensive expeditions on the far side of the Himalayas. While Ueli Steck charges up the upper bastion, his feet crammed into boots that belong to someone else, a massive logistical operation kicks into gear at the foot of Annapurna. It's a mobilization that history will remember as the ultimate example of brotherhood in the high mountains. Meanwhile, Denis Urubko and Don Bowie are currently positioned on the slopes of Makalu, an entirely different 8,000er, completely unaware that their plans are about to be shattered. When the distress call comes in regarding the unfolding tragedy, they don't hesitate. They do what most would consider impossible. They dismantle their high camp, blitz their way down the mountain, and jump into a helicopter bound for Annapurna base camp. Upon landing, their squad is bolstered by the arrival of the seasoned Russian veteran Sergei Bogomolov and the Polish climber and high-altitude physician Robert Szymczak. What is gathering at base camp is nothing short of a mountaineering dream team. Think of them as a Tier 1 Special Forces unit tailored for the death zone, fully equipped and mentally prepared to go to war against the mountain and death itself. Their objective is fundamentally different from the Swiss team's approach. If Ueli Steck is the rapid response paramedic, the sprinter who needs to reach the victim first to keep a pulse going, then Urubko's group represents the heavy cavalry. They are packing the heavy artillery that a rescue mission for a paralyzed climber simply cannot succeed without heavy oxygen cylinders and a makeshift stretcher system. There is a cruel, biting irony in this loadout. For years, Iñaki had been a vocal purist, mocking the use of supplemental oxygen as doping. Yet now, those very steel tanks represent his only slim chance of surviving the descent. The rescue team understands the physics of the situation. They cannot drag a motionless man down the mountain alive without that gas. Urubko and Bowie shoulder backpacks of crushing weight and launch a rapid ascent directly from the mountain's base, moving with a speed that defies the laws of gravity for men carrying such heavy burdens. Urubko, a man legendary for an endurance engine that just doesn't quit, acts like a human locomotive plowing through the snow to break the trail. Bowie, gritty and determined, stays right on his heels, matching him step for step. They are acutely aware that they are the second wave, the muscle that must take over the rescue from Steck when and if he manages to initiate the descent with Iñaki. Meanwhile, the drama is gripping the entire globe. This event marks a turning point in how the world consumes alpinism. It is one of the very first high-altitude tragedies broadcast online in near real time. From Spain to Russia, thousands of terrified spectators are glued to their screens, endlessly refreshing their browsers and praying for a miracle in this seemingly suicidal mission. They are fighting at a monstrous altitude of 7,400 meters. At this height, the human body usually shuts down and dies within days, even if it is perfectly healthy, let alone while battling severe edema. Yet against all odds, hope begins to surge. The sheer concentration of willpower, grit, and world-class professionalism gathering on the slopes of Annapurna is reaching a critical mass that feels unstoppable. It feels as though when humans of this caliber step into the arena, even the notorious death zone is forced to step back and yield a momentary opening. The second wave continues to chew up the vertical distance, closing the gap between life and impending death. Imagine 8 hours of nonstop swimming through waist-deep snow at the cruising altitude of a commercial airliner. That is the only way to describe Ueli Steck's solo push on May 22nd. When he departs Camp 3, there is nothing in front of him but an expanse of white silence and an objective that looks statistically impossible. Every single step forward transforms into a personal war of attrition. His foot plunges deep into the loose, unstable powder, forcing him to burn triple the energy just to wrench it free and plant it again. The Swiss machine is running at redline, incinerating his body's energy reserves at a rate that is frankly terrifying to watch. He is climbing completely alone without a rope to catch a fall, trusting his life to a stranger's boots and his own preternatural sense of balance. Running on nothing but fumes, the Swiss climber powers through the final stretch, reaching the desolate Camp 4 just as the sun begins to dip below the horizon. Ueli rips open the zipper of the tent, which is barely distinguishable from the surrounding snowdrifts. The scene that greets him inside is enough to make even a hardened alpinist's heart stop cold. He finds both men inside. Horia Kolobashanu, who has been keeping his friend tethered to this world for 3 agonizing days, is now teetering on the very edge of human endurance. The hypoxia has ravaged his coordination. He is deteriorating fast. His mind is so clouded he can barely process the reality of the moment. Steck makes a split-second clinical assessment. If the Romanian climber does not start descending, right this second, the mountain is going to claim 2 corpses instead of 1. Ueli administers the necessary drugs to Horia and practically physically shoves his friend out of the tent, pointing him down toward the waiting Simon Anthematten. Horia stumbles out, staggering like a drunkard, and disappears into the saving void of the descent. Now the tent holds only 2 souls, the rescuer and the dying man. Iñaki Ochoa de Olza, the indomitable Basque lion, is lying almost completely still, drifting in and out of a semi-conscious haze. His speech has shattered into incoherence, his attempts at communication breaking down into meaningless guttural sounds. The cerebral edema has advanced, aggressively swelling his brain against his skull. Iñaki does not recognize the man who has come to save him. He doesn't even know where he is, but his chest is still heaving, he is alive. Ueli Steck doesn't waste a single second on sentimentality or recovering from his own monstrous climb. He goes straight to work desperately, trying to stabilize Iñaki's vitals with whatever supplies are at hand. In the claustrophobic, freezing confines of the tent, where simply sitting up is a workout, he tries to bully Iñaki's fading body back into the fight. Steck knows the brutal math: moving a paralyzed man down technical terrain alone is a physical impossibility. His entire job now is to buy time to hold back the Reaper for just a few more hours until the heavy support team with the oxygen bottles can punch through from below. It was in all likelihood the longest night Ueli Steck ever endured, trapped in a tiny nylon cocoon on the edge of the stratosphere, listening to the ragged, wet breathing of a man slipping away inches from his face. The night of May 23rd stretches into an eternity, a vigil at the bedside of a dying man. At 7,400 meters, where every motion requires a deliberate act of willpower, the Swiss climber refuses to give up the battle for Iñaki's life. He tries to generate heat. He tries to force fluids into him, doing everything in his power to stroke the dying embers of Iñaki's life force. Then, amidst the darkness, a miracle occurs. Iñaki snaps back to consciousness. The fog in his eyes clears and he looks up at Ueli with a gaze that is suddenly sharp and lucid. In this fleeting moment of clarity, Iñaki says something so heartbreakingly human, it defies the inhuman conditions surrounding them. He asks for water, and then with a touch of his old self, he asks for a coffee. This simple, mundane request for a familiar comfort creates a powerful illusion of hope, a mirage suggesting that the crisis has peaked and that maybe, just maybe, everything is going to be all right. Ueli grabs onto this sliver of optimism with both hands, helping his friend drink, praying that the Basque climber's famously strong constitution has unlocked some hidden reserve of energy. But tragically, it is merely terminal lucidity, the final goodbye before the ultimate departure, the last bright flash of a light bulb before the filament burns out forever. Iñaki's body is spent. 5 days in the death zone have hollowed him out from the inside. As the dawn of May 23rd breaks over the Himalayas, the situation shifts catastrophically. The fragile hope that flickered in the darkness dies out with the fading stars. Iñaki's condition goes into a freefall. His breathing turns shallow and erratic. His pulse becomes a terrified thread. Ueli Steck already wrecked from a sleepless night, and the crushing altitude begins CPR. Performing chest compressions at this altitude is hell on earth. It drains the very last drops of a rescuer's strength. Yet the Swiss climber does not stop for a second, refusing to accept defeat. Meanwhile, just 200 vertical meters below them, the race of the second wave is nearing its climax. Denis Arubko and Don Bowie, loaded down with the life-saving oxygen, are battling through the deep snow drifts. They have already pushed to 7,200 meters. The tent is agonizingly close, maybe an hour, perhaps 90 minutes of climbing left. They can physically see their target. They know they are almost there. The entire world watching their GPS trackers holds its collective breath. But biology does not care about dramatic timing or what-ifs. At 12:30 in the afternoon, Iñaki Ochoa de Olza's heart beats one final time and then falls silent. He passes away in the arms of Ueli Steck, the stranger who crossed the mountain range to save him. A profound silence descends upon the tent, broken only by the relentless wind whipping against the nylon walls. Steck keys the radio and sends a brief, devastating message that stops Arubko's team dead in their tracks. The race is run. It is over. The Great Wall of Annapurna has claimed one of its most honest and brilliant nights, leaving the rescuers alone in the cold, facing the crushing emptiness and the knowledge that they did more than was humanly possible. But it still wasn't enough. His final resting place is not a grave in the ground, but the sky itself, the highest, most breathtaking sanctuary that anyone obsessed with the jagged peaks could ever hope to call their eternal home. Faced with a heartbreaking choice, Iñaki's family chooses a path that might baffle those of us living at sea level, but to the Brotherhood of the Rope, it is the ultimate sign of reverence. They decide that Iñaki will not come down. His body will remain forever at 7,400 meters, cradled by the eternal ice and snows of Annapurna. He merges completely with the savage elements he spent his entire existence chasing, transforming into a permanent fixture of the mountain's brutal architecture. There will be no dangerous recovery missions risking more lives, no somber funeral marches through city streets. He simply stays where he belongs. He stays home. But for the survivors, the nightmare hasn't finished its script just yet. The rescue team, now scattered like tiny specks across the vast, unforgiving white face of the mountain, must turn around and begin the treacherous journey back down. The high-octane adrenaline that fueled their desperate climb evaporates instantly, replaced by a crushing lead-weight exhaustion and the stinging, bitter taste of failure. Making a descent in this shattered condition is often where the mountain claims its second round of victims, as mental sharpness blurs into a fog and weary legs threaten to buckle with every step. Legends like Ueli Steck, Denis Arubko, Don Bowie, and Sergei Bogomolov stumble their way down to base camp, expecting only grief. Yet when they arrive, the heavy silence of tragedy is cut by a faint but undeniable pulse of victory. The tangible proof of this never-before-seen rescue effort is standing right there drawing breath in the thin air. Horia Kolibasanu, Iñaki's loyal Romanian climbing partner, has defied the odds and made it off the death zone alive. Without Steck's incredible selflessness handing over his own vital medication and forcing Horia to descend, and without the critical lifeline provided by Anthematin waiting at Camp 3, Annapurna would have certainly claimed a double sacrifice that week. Horia's beating heart is the living receipt of their shared bravery and sacrifice. They may have lost the desperate fight to save Iñaki, but they undeniably won the war against the Reaper, managing to tear at least one soul away from the abyss, causing the global mountaineering community, typically a stoic and reserved bunch, to erupt in thunderous applause and recognition. The heroes of this rescue are rightfully honored with the prestigious Gold Medal of Navarre for their sporting merit, yet the accolade that truly captures the essence of their deed is the Spirit of Mountaineering Award, a recognition that goes far beyond physical prowess. It serves as a stark, powerful reminder that even in the most brutal and selfish of sports, human compassion still towers above any summit record or accolade, setting the absolute gold standard for how we should behave when the situation turns hopeless and the walls close in. However, the narrative of Iñaki doesn't fade to black with his passing. Instead, his vibrant energy is redirected into a legacy far larger than any mountain peak, as his grieving family and devoted friends channel their pain into purpose by establishing the SOS Himalaya Foundation. While he was still breathing, Iñaki held a deep, burning ambition to construct a hospital and a school specifically for the children of Sherpas across Pakistan and Nepal, desperate to repay the debt to the humble locals who live their lives in the colossal shadows of the giants he climbed. Today, that beautiful vision is being meticulously built in his honor, ensuring that his spirit continues to uplift the vulnerable long after his physical strength has left the world, while books and gripping documentaries like Pura Vida preserve his philosophy for future generations. Iñaki Ochoa de Olza is not etched in history as merely another victim of high-altitude hubris or unchecked ambition, but rather stands tall as an enduring icon of absolute unbridled freedom and unwavering moral integrity. His entire existence serves as definitive proof that a summit is nothing more than a geographic coordinate on a map, whereas true, lasting success is calibrated by the character you display when the lights go out and the cold sets in. The philosophy of Pura Vida continues to echo through the valleys and the peaks, a constant reminder to us all that life isn't about the altitude you achieve, but rather the depth of the imprint you leave on the human hearts you touch along the way.